let's jump right into this thing. Keith, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and that's what you get for putting shows up on Radio for All.
yeah, thanks a lot. You and Dave were doing some parallel works on the Lincoln assassination that as you and I were speaking a couple days ago, that definitely would have seen a lot more collaboration between the two of you guys and putting these things together. Just a guess, because you did. I wouldn't have even known about Dave McGowan if it weren't for the interviews that you did with him, and then I found there was a wealth of material out there that Dave had put together, and I spent a lot of time on his websites looking at his point of view. Dave wasn't a believer, a Christian, as it were, for those who are listening for those purposes. He was a very down-to-earth individual in his take and in his research. He had a very healthy skepticism, in my opinion. His work on the Canyon, on Laurel Canyon, and Program to Kill, and Moondoggie, incidentally, which all three really kind of tie together. Even the Lincoln assassination as well. They seem like disconnected subjects, but they really are not, and they tend to dovetail together nicely in terms of the current position of things politically. Maybe you could speak to that, Keith. Like maybe talk a little bit about your work with Dave and how it particularly relates in terms of the Lincoln assassination.
Well, I mean, you're right, because of the three events or issues that you mentioned, they all have a common thread, and that is it's tough for people to countenance, but they have to understand that governments are really most interested in their own preservation, and they'll do whatever they have to, and I mean by any means necessary, to keep themselves sustained. And of the three things, I mean, well, everything that Dave covered, and even the Lincoln assassination, shows that the government was not being truthful. And of course, the history books reflect what's needed to have the people believe. I mean, it's propaganda. Let's just call it what it is. They do. They all. I mean, every single one. The Moondoggie thing that he wrote about, the Lincoln assassination, the Laurel Canyon thing. It's all a reflection of the government not being truthful. I mean, we have this benevolent feeling toward the government, but it is not altruistic in its roots. It'll do whatever it has to do, first and foremost. And so each one of those events had some content directed toward having people believe what they wanted them to believe, and not really what happened.
Right, and this wouldn't be, some kind of an attempt to get people to rebel in some way against government or whatever. It's not to create some attitude or some negative attitude in general towards the powers that be. Didn't George Washington have a quote that government is force? Government is force. In fact, if those who don't wish to have God over them as their governor has a government waiting on them.
Well, I mean, and we talked about what was in 1 Samuel. I mean, we talk about, you feel like you're being, not blasphemous, but, disrespectful if you say that there's a certain element of comedy in the Bible. And, one of them was the time when Samuel approaches Jehovah and wants to break the news to Jehovah, who already knows what's going on, about the fact that the tribes no longer wanted Jehovah as I guess you could say, as both a secular and a spiritual head. He took care of everything. No, they wanted kings. And then the Lord says to Samuel, you'll get your king, and this is what he'll do. I got to share this at some other time, but that is the nature of the business, and the Lord knew it. And he knew that we would be under secular governments. That's why this urge, a lot of times on Christians' part, to have a theocracy. It's not going to happen. And the Lord knew it. That's why he said, trust in me, I'll take you through it, and let Caesar deal with Caesar's things. And
we were talking about that the other day as well, when Peter brought, everybody wants to know, do we pay taxes or not?
Yeah.
And everybody was always coming to Jesus for this clarification, but he seemed to always confuse the matter for them. But it was really, from our perspective, in hindsight, it's clear what's being done, but it must have been so confusing to these guys. We'll catch the fish, take the coin out of its mouth, and bring it to me. Whose picture's on the coin? Well, I would give to him what's his, and I would give to God what's God's. But if you don't give to him what's his, you're going to they can make life rough for you. So you and they have the power to do so. And there was a clear delineation there. I think the point was, what God wants is not your money, is not your taxes, is not that kind of obedience or subservience.
Well, what you said about what we're going to talk about is not designed at all to try to foment any kind of rebellion against the government or anything like that. And I mean, I would have said, well, probably I believe that like maybe 15 years ago when I was a newbie patriot idiot. And then I realized later on, I mean, especially now in this day and age, you're not overthrowing anything. So just forget about it. It's not going to happen. All those dreams of people come together with their guns and all this other stuff. Look, I mean, if you look at society today, you're lucky if two neighbors talk to one another, and all of a sudden everybody's going to band together in this
right.
uprising.
Exactly.
Not going to happen, so don't worry about it. And the Lord did not want you to get violent either. So, that's not that. It's just that people have to decide for themselves if they believe, in fact, what we're saying, what they're going to do about it. But it's an individual thing. I mean, to me, and I know you guys feel the same way, that the only way out is up. And that's the bottom line. So what we're doing here is just revealing the fact that a lot of Christians think that, that we have the United States has some kind of special connection with the Lord. And it isn't. That actually was probably more promulgated by, believe it or not, the school system than it was the church, but the church bid on it. But there is no connection. I mean, we're called to be good, obedient citizens for what would you say, the efficient running of a society. But other than that, we're not to get involved in it. I mean, it's just a cesspool from which you never extract yourself once you get in. And to bring Dave back into this thing, and that is when he wrote the books and he exposed what he did, I don't believe in any one of his works, really. He was good this way and sometimes kind of frustrating this way. And that is he would raise the questions, but he wouldn't supply the answers. And I don't think it was his job to do that. I think that's legitimate. But that's what Dave did. So he never really had an objective other than just saying to folks, look, this is what I found. This is how it is. And you figure it out, what you want to do about it.
Well, exactly. And that's what I appreciated, I think, about his work. And not only his work, but his actual delivery. He didn't try to cram it down your throat. He just, or act like the smartest guy in the room or try to be continually monetizing it or something. He finally just thought, well, I guess I should stick them into books. People seem to really like it. So, he really didn't seem to be too motivated by that end of things, which was very refreshing in a world of, I mean, you turn on Christian radio and all you hear about is donations and people trying to make a living off of something that Dave could have actually made a living on if he wanted to. But I don't know. I appreciate that as well. Yeah, he really didn't cram it down your throat like in a dogmatic way. He just tossed it out there as food for thought.
I might have had him on maybe 15 times or so. It was like it was once a year. He was very much in demand, but he never turned me down. And I tried not to bug him because he was kind of tied in with that Maria Heller thing for a while.
Oh, yeah.
And then he would do other interviews. So I had him on regularly. So we had kind of like a benchmark every time we would get back together again about what did and didn't happen in life in the United States in between. I always enjoyed his work, and I was surprised that he was doing anything on the Lincoln assassination because I mean, I didn't go to his website every day. I would check in every so often to see what was going on, and I just happened to do it. I guess it was about 5 years ago, and I saw that he was working on kind of like a serialized work directed toward the Lincoln assassination and Booth and all this other stuff. And I, at the time, had started to look into it. I had the book Dark Union for a number of years, which it always drew me back. But anyway, I just went to do a usual check-in to see what Dave was doing and saw the Lincoln assassination. And then I started sending him emails with stuff I found just in case he wanted to use it. It was just like, here it is. If you can use it, fine. If not, no problem. And I want to bring up something right now if I could, and that is there are two resources as far as research goes that I think are just outstanding. And one of them is archive.org, which maybe some other people are familiar with because of, music and audios that is also archived there. But there's a treasure trove of books that are out of print or are suppressed and are available there. And the other resource is a website, chroniclingamerica.loc.gov. This is one of the greater things about the government, if you will, almost to its own detriment. But what is done on that website is a digitization of newspapers, a lot of U.S. city newspapers, going back as far as the mid-19th century. And one of the things I did while I was doing the work that I was, and concurrently with Dave, was to go back in the newspapers to look at the accounts of the assassination and what took place after. And I'll just give you another one real quick, to show you how much this can reveal. I went back to, I guess it was around 1856, and accessed the paper. I think it was the New York, it was they had two newspapers at the time. I forget which one it was. It might have been the Star. And lo and behold, something none of us ever heard of, and that was there was an assassination attempt of Buchanan, the president before Lincoln, at his inaugural party in the National Hotel in D.C. And we never heard a thing about that, and there it is in the newspaper. So you see what I mean? It's something you find here. It's just absolutely fascinating, and at the same time, it's kind of disconcerting because it's like, how come we didn't hear about this? And I told you about this, and I always heard it rumored that Tsar, I believe it was Alexander II, sent over his Atlantic and Pacific fleets to the United States, to New York and San Francisco in the autumn of 1863. Now, I had always heard it rumored, and I even tried to get on some blogs in Russia to ask anyone if they knew, and one individual responded that they had heard about this as well, but could not find any information. And to show you how much information gets processed in a short time, it was only a couple of years later, bang. If you were to put that into a search engine now, you could find it. You'll never get it in a history book. There's also a book in archive.org, in fact, entitled Lincoln and the Russians. So what seems to be implausible and most citizens of this country would laugh and shout down is in fact very true. And I sent you even a sample of that as it appeared in the New York Tribune.
Absolutely, I checked that out, and it is fascinating. And I had heard that as well before, that the that the Russians were very ready and willing to come to Lincoln's aid in what would be our, quote, Civil War. I can't help but think that the same powers that were at play, he recognized what was happening. It wasn't just a few years later that Russia became public enemy number one in the mind of Americans. Yeah. I couldn't watch a movie growing up without having a bad Russian or a bad German to propagandize, and I believed it. I didn't know not to trust it. So I was definitely grew up in the thick of the hazing in terms of Russian and German propaganda.
Real quick, and we can maybe address this later on, but just to make sense of it to anybody who's like scratching their head now listening to what we're just saying, the reason why that makes sense and is not a conspiracy theory is that Russia had just gotten defeated by Britain and France in the Crimean War, which is in like the 1850s, because they wanted to get a warm weather port out of their country through the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So they wanted something there. There's no doubt about it. And even if you were saying they were being imperialistic, well, okay, but still. So they faced off with the Brits and the French, which it's the first time those two countries were allies in the history of both countries. It's the first time they came together. And they gave Russia a good bloody nose. And the Tsar was, I'll see you guys again. So here we are about 10 years later. There was communication between Lincoln and the Tsar, and I think he's the one that brokered it. And he was more than willing, as he did, to put his fleets out on the open sea before they got ice locked up in their northern ports, which is the only ones they had. And they knew the Brits were going to lay for them probably that next spring and scuttle all the boats before they could make it onto the high seas. Because once they did, neither the Brits or the French could match what the Russians had in their ships and with their maneuverability and otherwise. So really what was happening there then, using the United States as a triggering point, Russia, by doing that, by sending the fleets in the United States, more or less was saying, go ahead, make my day. Because the Brits were in Canada, the soldiers were in Canada thinking they may have to get into this. And the French, by the way, had troops under Maximilian in Mexico because the Pope had importuned Napoleon III to send troops to Mexico because Juarez had liberated the lands that the church had appropriated
I see.
So, so Juarez was going to steal him back, and he was doing pretty well. I mean, he was a great nationalist leader. The Vatican being unhappy with developments because they were having their own problems with their papal states and Garibaldi, asked Napoleon if he'd send some troops over, and Maximilian led them. So they were in Mexico and surely had their hands full. But what Juarez also did was he made it known to both North and South that when their war was over, any soldiers who wanted to come down and assist him in throwing out the French would be given some land and the ability to farm. And that also ties into the person who really was shot in Garrett's barn, who was on his way down there and never made it. But that for another time. So, I mean, so this is how it's all involved. And as why I had said to you that the Civil War, which was an internecine battle in this country, could have easily triggered the very first World War. And one of the intrigue that I knew of that was going on at the time, and I found this by mistake, while I was looking around in those newspapers on chronicling America, I find that while the Civil War is going on, there's a front page story that recounts the United States having vessels, an armada, if you will, or a flotilla that involved British, French, and Dutch navies. Those four navies were going at it with the Japanese pirates, or chieftains, if you will, that were trying to resist. We know that story about Admiral Perry going over and opening Japan to trade. Well, maybe Japan didn't want to be open to trade. Right. And sure enough, these chieftains or warlords were trying to expel the foreigners. So while the Civil War is going on, we have the manpower and the resources to send over a part of our Navy to join the other three to kick Japan's butt. I mean, isn't there enough to do right here? And here we are already in some other intrigue globally. So, I mean, that's why I'm saying it was a crazy time during the Civil War.
Yeah, what year was that? What year was that, Keith?
It would have been 1863, right around there.
Okay.
And I'll go looking for it again. I'm saying it's 1863 because I did a lot of searching to see if I could find that article or any article, I mean, in any newspaper about the Tsar sending the navies over. So while I was doing all that, I find this other thing. I'm going, are you kidding me? I mean, here we are in the Civil War, and the Union sent over ships to go duke it out with the Japanese. Huh. I don't know. I'm like, come on, man, is it ever over? The answer is no. So
seems to be the MO. Half our military is somewhere else doing something when something big is happening right here. Yeah,
and there's another thing also which I found, and that is there was a desire at least maybe 10, 15 years before Lincoln's presidency, where they were trying to lean on the previous presidents, I know it's probably Fillmore and Pierce, to buy Cuba. Everybody wanted Cuba. So here's another, we don't even have our own home cleaned out, if you will, or in right order, and here we're going to buy Cuba. Of course, that never did happen, and it's ironic that when we had the Spanish-American debacle, the United States wins and doesn't take Cuba. So it's like, huh?
Yeah, something's
going on. So if you wanted 100,
that's insane. I mean, there's got to be a common thread here. There's too many coincidences in all of that. Are you familiar with Judah Benjamin? And
oh yeah.
And what role did he have to play in all of this in the Lincoln years?
Well, he was Davis's right-hand man. I believe his title would have been Secretary of State.
Yes, Attorney General. Yeah,
he was what Stanton was to Lincoln. Only those two actually did get along, Davis and Benjamin. And of course, Benjamin expatriated to England and was buried there. And I think Davis was on his way too, but of course he was caught and then released, and I don't think he ever did. And it's really interesting too, because Charles Wilcox, who wrote about this whole situation as well, did a great job. And what he found out is that Jefferson Davis had a summer cottage in Canada. And in fact, Canada and the Brits, if they had to get in, would have probably come in on the side of the Confederacy. They had the most contact with regard to the continuation of the war until finally the Confederacy got its sovereignty. In fact, it's funny, I guess it would be a trivia question, that the most northern location of a Civil War, not battle, but conflict, whatever you want to call it, was actually in St. Albans, Vermont.
Oh, wow.
What happened was, a lot of Confederate spies were hanging out in Canada because they could come down and then get out. And Canada was obviously friendly to them. So some spies concocted a plot where they would rob 2 banks in St. Albans and then pop back into Canada. And that did take place. So there was another situation with Canada and the Brits being involved with the U.S. and not necessarily on the side of the Union.
Right.
Not to go on and on, but there was another thing happening, and that was the Irish wanted their independence from England. So a lot of the Fenians came from Ireland into Canada and were instigating troubles in New England and robbing and doing other things. So, I mean, I don't get why the Irish come here and bother us, but to get their independence, but they did. And you'll find in these papers also all kinds of articles of concern about Sinn Féin and what it was doing in the United States.
Interesting.
In fact, that was another group they were thinking about using to kidnap Lincoln. And that was in this letter from Barnes. I don't know if you read that letter yet.
I did. The one you sent? Yeah. You might refresh the listeners.
Well, to again show you all the webs in this situation. James Barnes was a Southern businessman, I guess, headquartered in Camp Girardeau, Missouri. And he was in contact with an exporting company and a gentleman by the name of Watson. I think the company's name was DeMille. They were located in Manhattan. Well, there was a pork for cotton deal that was going on between the North and the South. Lincoln signed off on it, so he knew about it. And what it was the Union armies had so ravaged the Southern farmers, killing a lot of the livestock, that the South was in dire need for some kind of meat. The United States was in dire need of the cotton because Britain was telling the North that, listen, we want the cotton that you guys have been supplying us. And that ended when you guys got into the scrap with the Confederacy. So here's the deal. Either you get your thing straight and we get the cotton back. We don't care what happens over there. Just give us the cotton. Do what you have to do, because the cotton had to go to the North to get manufactured because the South had no manufacturing. So the Brits were like, listen, I want the cotton because we're using this crap in India, which, of course, was one of their colonies, and that's why they accessed it. And they're like, if we don't get it, we're going to have to come over and settle your matters. So that's the reason why the Union wanted the cotton, not for itself necessarily, but because they needed to give it to the especially the Brits. And so while this war is going on, you have businessmen on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line and military from both sides of the Mason-Dixon line meeting in, I think it's St. Lawrence Hall in Montreal. They would go to Canada as kind of like a neutral zone to do their dealings. And what I was laughing about was that Barnes was writing to DeMille, and out of this came the fact that they didn't think Booth was going to be effective in kidnapping Lincoln. That was the original plan, was to kidnap Lincoln and use him as a chip to stop the war and have some peace talks. So Booth was going to lead that plot, and they got tired of waiting for him, and they were thinking about sacking him and using this James Barnes. In the letter, Barnes says, listen, we've been trying to overthrow him, and meaning Lincoln, and, Booth isn't doing it, and these guys aren't doing it. And he makes the crack about the Irish. He said, they're just better off in bars, talking.
Yeah, I did see that. And but getting rid of Lincoln would have left millions of dollars on the table. Is that correct? Am I understanding that?
Yeah, well, what happened was, and this is why Barnes was angry. Now, you had people in the North, in Lincoln's party, and in his cabinet, and in his military, that were making money. They were investors in his pork for cotton deal. They wanted the war to last forever. Lincoln had signed off on it, didn't say anything about it in his reelection campaign. And then he was reelected, and then Lincoln turned around and said, okay, look, that's it for these deals. He did two things. He scotched the pork for cotton deal, and he set loose Sherman, maybe Sheridan too, but Sherman and Grant to do that famous scorched earth policy. Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily that he was being a tyrant. I'll tell you what, Lincoln was, I don't want to say corrupt, but Lincoln knew what the deal was. He knew what he had to do when he was in the presidency. He was going to have to be the one who presided over starting the Civil War, which Buchanan didn't want to do, and may have been the reason he was poisoned. Unfortunately, he survived, but he still didn't prosecute the war. So when Lincoln got in, Lincoln knew what he had to do. I mean, they had scripts back then, at that time as well. After it was over, I think Lincoln, and I really do believe, had a change of heart. And I'm going to tell you right now, the literature I found contemporarily, it was to the fact that they did not see Lincoln as an evangelical Christian. In fact, a lot of people upon hearing it were saying, no. If anything, he might have even been a pantheist. But again,
Dave brings out that point as well.
But Lincoln, I think, really after Gettysburg was not the same man. I think, and to his credit, I think he ended on a positive note in a sense.
Right.
That he didn't want to see this thing going on any longer, and everybody else wanted the war to continue. The Brits wanted the war to continue because they were making money in investments, building ships for both sides. And they had it made.
Yeah.
And even the Southerners and some of the higher officials in the South were making money off this. Yeah. So they wanted this little cash cow to continue. Sorry for the pun, even though it was pigs. But anyway.
There's a part of me that wants to give Lincoln and Kennedy the benefit of the doubt in that they knew the script going into power, but they had changes of heart after seeing the things that they saw, the extreme poverty, the extreme injustice, as it were, that the poorer classes were feeling. And I believe that they were feeling pangs from these things. I don't know this. It's just might be a naive assumption, but I want to think anyway that they came to their senses and turned to a more humble attitude.
I don't know if he ever accepted Jesus Christ as Savior. It is documented that there was a Reformed Catholic priest by the name of Charles Chinnicky. Now, Chinnicky supposedly was, you might want to call it an off-the-record confidant of Lincoln. So whatever took place between those two, who knows? But certainly Lincoln and Kennedy share one of those many commonalities in the fact that both of them knew what the deal was when they took the presidency. Okay, they weren't lily white, but I do believe that Kennedy, and I'm just going to advance this, that especially after his father was disabled with a stroke and kind of couldn't run, I don't want to say roughshod over him, but couldn't be a ramrod for the two brothers to keep him in line, if you know what I mean, John and Robert. That's my feeling. I'm not saying that that's what it was, but something did occur where he didn't want to continue with what was going on.
Yeah.
And again, like Lincoln, he had everybody wanting his tail, and they got it. So there's another, not often published, if at all, commonality between Lincoln and Kennedy. Kennedy had everybody mad at him. Lincoln had, well, here's the 4 kidnap plots that there were, okay, while it was still possible to kidnap Lincoln. That was one by his own party. How do you like that? They wanted to kidnap him, and of course, blame it on someone else. The South wanted to kidnap him for obvious reasons. The Pork for Cotton people wanted him kidnapped, and that's what Booth was supposed to do, spearhead the kidnapping plot they had. And the Marylanders wanted him kidnapped. What is forgotten is that Maryland went north only because they were forced to. Oh, and D.C.'s there? Yeah, I get that. But the point is, regardless whether D.C. was on the northern side of the Potomac, they had nothing in common with the North. If you think about Maryland, that's the beginning of plantation country. They wanted to side with the other plantation owners in the South, and they didn't want to go into the North, and they were forced to. So you had D.C., which had to be protected from the citizens of that state of Maryland. And the other thing was, did you ever hear about the perils he faced when he went through Baltimore, going into the North anywhere?
Who's that? Booth?
Lincoln.
No.
Every time he was going to travel, and it was mostly to New York, anytime he was going to travel north on the train, it had to go through Baltimore. Well, Baltimore is Vatican Central, a seat for the Jesuits, as well as Georgetown in D.C. So every time he went through Baltimore, they had to lie about what train he was on. They had doubles.
Yeah.
They had Pinkertons in there.
Okay.
They were throwing rocks at the train. They wanted to pull him off and kill him. So here's the situation with Maryland. Their plantation owners and their people want Lincoln kidnapped just to cessate the war. He had 4 plots on him. And so when we heard of that famous dream he had about not seeing through his second term, it may have been more than just a dream. I mean, I think he knew that he was not going to get through the next 4 years alive. I really do. And I think from that point on, you look at a man who's going to do the right thing, resigned to do such, and resigned also the fact that he would not be living too much longer. I think that's a pretty accurate portrayal of Lincoln, even if he was one of the lackeys for the powers that be. He certainly didn't lead that way. So, there you have it.
That is interesting. Dave, I just want to very quickly read something here from the intro of Dave's first chapter into this, where he kind of lays out how Lincoln was actually viewed. It said just a little over a year, in what will be a historic 150-year anniversary, the American people, and likely all people around the world, will come together in remembrance of a man who was once rather preposterously described by a biographer as, quote, the most gentle, most magnanimous, most Christ-like ruler of all time. That man, of course, was Abraham Lincoln, allegedly the 16th and most beloved president of the United States. I say allegedly here because it's hard to see how someone could be the president of an entity that didn't actually exist. And the reality is that during Lincoln's tenure, there was no such thing as the United States. There were northern states presided over by Washington, and there were Confederate states presided over by the parallel government in Richmond. But there certainly weren't any United States. Wouldn't it then be just as accurate to describe Jefferson Davis as the 16th president of the United States? Just checking. I also say allegedly here because Lincoln was certainly not, during his lifetime, a beloved man. He was thoroughly despised throughout half the country and wasn't even all that popular in the North. He received merely 40% of the popular vote in 1860 and could have, as more honest historians have noted, been very easily defeated had the Democratic Party bothered to field a viable candidate. But Lincoln was clearly the anointed one. So, do you have any insight or reason as to why Lincoln would be chosen? Did anybody know who Abraham Lincoln was? Was he a popular person that in your?
Yeah. In fact, there is in the Neff Guttridge Library in Indiana State University. Those two gentlemen are the authors of Dark Union. They fell into a treasure trove of information that ironically came out of Indiana. But Indiana was the most southern of the northern states. They were not happy. Now, did you not live in that area, the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers?
Yes, I did. I did.
You did, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever spend enough time in the south of Indiana to realize that they were more southern than they were northern?
I was too young to really notice it at the time, but in looking back at it, absolutely. It was very southern.
It was. I mean, that section of Indiana that borders, Kentucky?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I lived on the Henderson, Kentucky, Evansville, Indiana, on the Ohio River.
Okay, that state was really pro-South, and the guerrilla outfit that wreaked the most havoc in Indiana were the Knights of the Golden Circle. They were a real problem in Indiana. You think about it, even though it's a northern state, it more or less had more in common, if you will, with the South. And I'll go back to the original reason I bring this up. There was a person by the name of, William Robert Bernard, was a spy for the North, and then he got involved with these National Detective Police, which was supervised by Lafayette Baker. And I know you know that name. That pops up a lot.
Sure. Like basically the head of the FBI of the time, or?
Well, yeah, this NDP, they called it, National Detective Police, which sounds like, a redundancy to us now, but it wasn't then. That was the forerunner, take your pick, of the Secret Service or the FBI. Yeah. They were a federal police force, and it was a member of that force by the name of Andrew Potter and his brother, who supplied Neff and Guttridge with a great deal of information. So, here's one of those sources that they just lucked into, and that's why they wrote the book Dark Union. But the reason I bring up this William Robert Bernard, two things. One, he said he didn't like Lincoln. Even though he was a Northerner, he didn't like Lincoln. He said he knew that he was obviously not his own man, that the war was being prosecuted more by his military advisors than himself. And I always wondered, why do you take a civilian and make a commander-in-chief when he's likely not been in the military or not been very high up in the military? So he just said that he didn't think Lincoln was too astute as far as being somebody who could prosecute a war or oversee it. But he also said something about Lincoln that he said he found him. I'm not going to spend the time pausing to try to find where it is, but there's a memoir of his that's also in that library, and that's what I'm addressing right now. All right, I think I have it here. This is Bernard writing. I have always felt that he, meaning Baker, like the much martyred Lincoln, was murdered by very powerful and most ambitious political foes. He felt that if Lincoln had not been assassinated, he would never have taken his place amongst the pantheon, of most respected presidents. Like he wouldn't have been on Rushmore years later.
Right, okay.
So he just said he was just not very astute. And the only thing that has really put him into the rank of all-time presidents was in fact his death. So that'll answer your question.
Yeah.
There's a site on the internet that's part of the Indiana State University Library, where they have, for instance, that letter from Barnes to Watson, which you read, and it's really pregnant with all kinds of conspiratorial, not so much theories, but plans, with one of them going to be acted upon. Because they had that information, They got as much of it up as they could while they were still alive. Unfortunately, both authors have now passed, and I don't know if that website's ever going to get any bigger.
There was also another document over there, a PDF that you shared with me that was a death certificate for John Wilkes
Oh, no,
Booth.
it was, again, kind of teasing this whole thing, where we're going, and I think where Dave was going. I do believe he didn't finish the work. I think he may have even had to stop the work because of his illness, and certainly upon his death, that was the end of it. I think he wrapped it up quick. We did one show together, the last one he ever did with Michael Adams, talking about this. But Booth was not shot in Garrett's barn. He got out with a valet and a sidekick, if you will. That was not David Harold. That's for later on. They made it out of Maryland. They were supposed to be picked up by a ship waiting for them in either the Patuxent or the Potomac, because while there was supposed to be Boyd kidnapping Lincoln on that Friday night, well, what happens is Booth pops him, and yes, Booth did shoot him. Now, Booth is on the run with his sidekick Henson. He later gets joined by his longtime valet, Henry Johnson. So the point is, he gets out of there. He goes through Canada, where he had a lot of his money. He got a British passport in the name of a John Wilkes, who he knew that was a British immigrant that moved to Terre Haute, Indiana, lived his whole life there, and died there. Died in 1922, I think. Well, Booth assumed his identity, and with the help of the Brits, went to the British consul in San Francisco and got a passport to get out of the country. So now, to answer your question, years later, I believe it was 1882 or 3, Booth is dying. He's in India. He has a supposed wife. You never know with Booth whether or not he was married. I mean, he had 4 or 5 paramours and had children by all of them. And he was with Elizabeth Burnley, a British citizen. They lived together, and he dies in Assam province in India in 1883. That's when he died. The original John Wilkes, whose identity was stolen and actually probably given up willfully for some money, died in 1916. They both have separate tombstones. Wilkes is in, the true Wilkes is in Indiana, and Booth is in India. Now, in India, he drafts his will. It is sanctioned by the Indian government, that it's official. After Booth died, it was this Elizabeth Burnley who importuned American officials, like the former President Grant, military general Lew Wallace, who also wrote Ben-Hur. And they went ahead and they had the will probated in the United States and his assets unfrozen and divided amongst the women who bore his children. Now, if he died in Garrett's barn, something's wrong here.
Right.
You know, there's stories about him being shot by Jesse James. There's stories about him living as a teacher here and something there. And
also him being the Boyd character as well, right, with the same initials.
Boy, yeah. I mean, you had John Wilkes Booth. Oh, yeah, James W. Boyd. Are you serious? And they both looked alike to a great extent.
And Boyd was known to have the gaping leg wound, as it were, when Booth was just supposed to have a broken ankle or something like that.
What happened was Boyd was shot. I think it was Booth who broke his right ankle. Let's just say, whatever that was, well, Booth was shot in the left leg, but they both had limps. And it gets really crazy because on that Friday night, it is Booth that goes across the bridge. He had the password and the counter password. The password was TB, and the sentry said TB what? And the countersign was TB Road. And he had it, and he got out. But it wasn't Harold that left behind him. It was Henson. This is the great discrepancy. Henson went behind him. Harold was drunk that night in Maryland. And they grabbed Harold the next morning, and they brought him in to get photographed. That's where you see the famous photograph of him in the manacles. And everybody's saying, well, if he's in manacles, how in the world can he be on the run? Well, this is how it happened. Here's another thing about the reason why that war is so fascinating. Because they had 3 things for the first time. They had telegraph, they had photography, and the third thing was a greater, I was going to say web, but I mean a greater number of New York dailies. I mean, not New York dailies, I mean U.S. dailies. I always thinking of New York-centric because I always went to the Tribune. So you had these reporting agencies, you had a means by which to get information traveled wherever in a very short amount of time, and then you had this photography, which everybody was in love with. So during the Civil War, you're all familiar with the photography done by, and I forget what his name is. What happened during the assassination is anybody that was a person of interest, they brought into D.C. and they got him photographed. They photographed everything. And they photographed Harold, who was a prisoner at the time, I think, on the Saugus that was parked out in the Potomac. Matthew Brady is the photographer I was thinking about.
Okay.
So what happens is he gets photographed, he gets interviewed, he's a person of interest, and they let him go. But they grabbed him the next day on Saturday and had him lead the Union troops to wherever were suspected Southern sympathizers. So here's Harold with the Union troops. He brings him to Boyd's place. Now, Boyd was running that night, too, because when he heard that Lincoln had been assassinated, he knew his butt was grass. So he wanted to get his things together and get out of Maryland. But what happens is the troops come up and they grab Boyd. So here's Boyd and Harold. And that's also answers the question as to how could Harold be manacled and then be off on the run. That's how he got off on the run. What the two of them did is Boyd and Harold looked at each other one night and said, look, we can get out of here if we play it really smart. The old cowboy thing about stealing two horses and getting out of there. That's what they did.
Yeah.
And the author's Neff and Gurridge kind of like imply that it was a little too easy that they got away. So there could have been a ruse to try to follow both of them and find even more people. But it turned out they got away. So there's Harold and there's Boyd and there's Henson and there's Booth. Now, is that confusing? Absolutely. Yeah. You had two pairs of fugitives or persons of interest on the lam into Maryland, into Virginia. I say into Maryland, but they had gone across the Chesapeake and couldn't get a boat out of there. So they were all over the joint. They got into Virginia, not too far. I forget who was ahead of who at the time. But what Booth and Henson did is they did not stay at Garrett's Bar, and they continued west and made their way towards Petersburg. And they continued on through an underground network of doctors who had been willing to lend their services to Confederate soldiers and stuff during the war. Well, now they're still going to do it for whatever spies or whoever may be on the run. And sure enough, it was Booth and Henson. And so they stopped at a number of doctors on their way west through Virginia, and that's chronicled. In fact, there's historic homes not too far up from where you are that show that this is the house of so-and-so who took care of Booth that night. And, of course, Mudd was another who got convicted.
Right.
And then they made their way through the Blue Ridge, again, led by Southern partisans who allowed Booth and Henson and then Henry Johnson, by that time, the valet, joined them. All three of them went to Harper's Ferry, where Isola, Booth's wife, and there's a discussion whether it was really Booth's wife or not. But the point is that, that was his main squeeze. So he comes up there. She thinks he's dead. So he pops up at Harper's Ferry. It's like, well, I guess you're not dead. So this is what happened to them. Whereas Boyd and Harold get caught at Garrett's Bar. There is newspaper accounts of the dialogue that took place in which they yell into the bar, have Booth come out. Boyd's not talking. So Harold says, he said his name is Boyd. And so, finally, Harold comes out, and they never let Boyd get out. They fire the barn, obviously, which is one of the reasons why Harold wanted to get out of there. But somebody shot Boyd, and this is still a matter of contention, because of the entry bullet to his body, held a gun to himself and offed himself, because he says, you're not taking me.
It is interesting, the routes that all these people took. Some of them didn't make it very far out of Washington at all. Dave makes this point. Some people were further away. Obviously, John Surratt ends up in the Vatican Guard over in Italy, and it's quite a story how all of that goes. And we're running up on an hour here, so already I can't believe how fast it's already gone. But we'll have to pick this one up on the next one. But I would like to finish up with a few comments, though, if you would, on Dave's assertion of Rathbone, and did Booth really make the shot? And he lays out quite an entertaining scenario of what actually occurred when the assassination actually took place, kind of a moment-by-moment hypothetical. Now, if I were doing this, would I really do this or this? And it really is kind of, it's very entertaining, actually, and comical. He makes an interesting case for Rathbone. And I wouldn't be dogmatic one way or the other, but he seems to be potentially onto something with that. For instance, in addition, the guy who made the hasty exit across the stage and out the back door, and I'm reading from part 9 of Why Everything You Think You Know About the Lincoln Assassination Is Wrong by Dave. In addition to the guy who made a hasty exit across the stage and out the back door and the guy who caught a bullet to the head and never regained consciousness, there were, depending on which version of events one chooses to believe, either 3 or 4 eyewitnesses present in that box that fateful evening. Mary Todd Lincoln was certainly there, as were Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée stepsister, Clara Harris. By some accounts, including Forbes' own account, presidential aide Charles Forbes was there as well. And also, Ulysses S. Grant was supposed to be there, but he makes the assertion that how would he know that he wouldn't be there that day? And why would he choose the Derringer over a six-shooter? And I'm sure you have further research in these things. Again, he seems to downplay what Neff and Guttridge came to conclude in Dark Union, and I think he saw them as agent provocateurs. It seems to be my take on what Dave felt about their works and their efforts. You bring to light the fact that they came into documentation that is very compelling, that does give their work a level of credibility that Dave didn't quite get that far, I don't think, in his research. But he notes that real quickly that these witnesses were ever questioned. None of these guys were ever questioned by reporters. Only one was questioned by authorities. Only one was ever deposed. Only one was ever called upon to testify as to what he or she witnessed that evening. Only one ever spoke publicly in any way about what exactly transpired in that box. Despite the fact that the Lincoln assassination was billed as the crime of the century, authorities seem to have had no interest at all in speaking with the handful of people who actually witnessed the event. And he goes through with a bunch of moment-by-moment things that occur that are really quite interesting in terms of putting together a crime scene, which would be very difficult to do 100 years later, 150 years later. But he ends it with the statement, so here we have a guy who knew Booth, and yet from just 3 feet away, with the guy directly in his line of sight, he did not recognize him as Booth in the theater, and he's referring to McGowan. He said one guy closest to the scene was Army Captain Theodore McGowan, who was seated in Ford's Theater not far from the entrance to the presidential box. I like to think that this guy was an upright sort of guy, primarily because he had a very honorable name. But then when called upon to testify at the military tribunal, he said that I was present at Ford's Theater on the night of the assassination. I was sitting in the aisle, leading by the wall toward the door of the president's box, when a man came and disturbed me in my seat, causing me to push my chair forward and permit him to pass. He stopped about 3 feet from where I was sitting and leisurely took a survey of the house. I looked at him because he happened to be right in my line of sight. I know John Wilkes Booth, but not seeing the face of the assassin fully, I did not at the time recognize him as Booth. It's a fairly safe bet that the government exerted considerable pressure on Captain McGowan to positively identify Booth, and yet he proved unable or unwilling to do so. Curious also that McGowan referred to him in the present tense when Booth was supposed to be dead. Was Rathbone really gravely injured? And again, he was claimed to be cut. Or his wound a substantially less, and we didn't get into into the details on this. I'm sorry, folks. I'm jumping over a lot of stuff here for you. Go back and listen to Why Everything You Think You Know About the Lincoln Assassination Is Wrong, or read Dave's stuff over on CenterForAnInformedAmerica.com under the Lincoln tab, and you'll get a good idea of what's going on here. But was it really John Wilkes Booth who entered the presidential box that evening? And whoever it was, did he enter for the purpose of assassinating the president? Would a small Derringer have been the weapon of choice for an assassin, or was it a weapon that would have been easy for someone else in that box to have brought along? One thing we do know, Henry Rathbone's actions in the years after the assassination clearly demonstrated that he was fully capable of 2 things: murder and self-inflicted knife wounds. He goes into the background of Major Henry Rathbone's murder of his wife and then stabbing himself to make it look like he had been attacked. Could he have done the same thing in that box? Cut himself to make himself look like he was attacked by Booth? It just all seems so crazy.
Oh, it is.
Dave's breakdown of why would he use a Derringer? Why is there so little corroboration from eyewitnesses as to what actually the mainline story of events? Those are viable questions. John Wilkes Booth, being from a genealogy that's very aristocratic, being a descendant of John Wilkes, from a long line of barristers and the ruling class, as it were. And why would John Wilkes Booth commit the murder as John Wilkes Booth? He's a famous actor. He has access to a trunk of all kinds of disguises. Just so many things that tend to point in that direction. And for division in this country to be a very specific goal of certain parties.
Let's do this. I can answer some of that stuff. We could do that on another show because I know we're running out of time and we can use it pretty much as a teaser and follow up with it. But let me just say one or two blanket things. There was a conspiracy to kill him. There was a cover-up. The person who led the cover-up was Stanton, who was probably the most powerful person in the United States, North and South. All he wanted was Lincoln dead. That was accomplished. After that whole murder was literally prosecuted from an already preconceived conclusion, and that is it was a conspiracy. It came out of Richmond, and these guys did it. I mean, because remember, 8 were also convicted in the conspiracy, of which I believe, 6 were hung.
We didn't talk about any of that, but there were a lot of people that went to their deaths as a result of this.
The reason why the case wasn't more fully examined was because it was not meant to be. It was shoddy, or it looked like it left a lot of holes. Exactly right, and it was supposed to. So if you go from the perspective of we wanted him dead, he's dead, we don't want any of us, meaning the true conspirators, to be hanged for this. And so they were more than happy just to go with what they had. And actually what they did when they arrested the 8, of which one is John Surratt's mother, Mary, they were doing it to shut him up. And even Payne and I think Azarat were both hooded the whole time that they were in prison, so they wouldn't talk to anybody. What we're used to as far as people being suicided, the body counts around other conspiracies like the famous one with Kennedy, same thing took place then there. That's why there were as many questions about Kennedy to this day as there is about Lincoln 100 years earlier, or 98. But so anyway, I'll leave it at that. But that's why it looked bad, because it was meant to be bad. I mean, It was supposed to be shoddy. And we'll get into the diary and the missing pages that Stanton got his hands on. That was supposedly Booth. So for another time, and we can start with just what you posed right there with Rathbone and everyone.
I think that would be a good place to leave off with this one, and a good place to enter with the next one. It's really a fascinating story. It is the adventure story of adventure stories, really for the time. And I think when folks are brought up to speed here, including myself, in terms of the machinations and where these people went, where they came from, where they ended up, it really is a lot more relevant than it would seem on the surface. So thank you very much for sharing this information.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
This has been Keith Hansen, a.k.a. Vyzygoth, for those that are familiar with his work over the years with the Grassy Knoll and Vyzygoth Raw and Think or Be Eaten, Think or Be Beaten. He has done just yeoman's work and put out a prolific amount of information that I hope will make its way back to the airwaves soon. It's certainly missed, and a voice that's missed on the airwaves, man. And thank you, folks, for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on the Pure Grace Podcast.